Okay, this video is going to be about making a compass from a lodestone. Okay, and I already am starting off with a compass that I own, a woodsman's compass, and I'm going to go through a couple of progressions here. Okay, the simplest thing that you could do to make your own compass is to use a needle, and if you have a permanent magnet. Okay, I have a permanent magnet here. If you stroke steel needle like this, using the south pointing towards what will become the north end of your pointer, and then turning it around and doing the other side. You can do it 20, 30, 50 times. Okay, you could do it a lot. After doing that, you will have magnetized the needle. So the north side here, you'll see, will attract no, I'm sorry. The north side will repel the north pole of a compass, and that is the blue. The red is the north pole of the needle, which is a magnet. Okay, the compass needle. The south side of the one that I magnetized will attract. That will be a south pole, and the north pole will repel. And you'll see that behavior if you use your compass. A compass is a very sensitive indicator of magnetic field, okay, because the magnetic field of the Earth is rather weak. Now, a simple way to make, once you've got this magnet, permanent magnet, an easy way to turn that into a compass is using the oldest known form of this, which would be a water compass. And in this case, for example, it takes a piece of cork, and I will take the needle, and it's not exactly centered, but it's good enough. And it will flow, and it will point. The north-seeking pole of the compass will point north. That's known as the North Pole. Okay. Now, I kind of placed it on that way, so to show you that that's actually working as a compass, you can, spin it around so that it's pointing in a different direction. And you'll see that it will right itself. It'll generally go through a couple of periods of oscillation, but it will be damped because of the water on the cork damps the motion. Okay, and that's pointing in the same direction, more or less, as the compass needle. Okay. Whenever you are using something as a compass, you want to make sure it's away from anything that's magnetic or magnetized, because that will affect the direction it's pointing in. The needle will try to point towards any piece of metal, or it'll be affected by a magnetic field. Okay, so outside you don't normally have a problem with that, but inside you can have a problem with that. Okay, so now I want to show you. I had bought a lodestone online. Okay, for about $10, I got this piece of magnetite. It was advertised as a lodestone. Okay. And I got it, and I wanted to make a compass out of it, because this is how the first compasses would have been made, using a lodestone after it was noticed that it had attraction towards iron. And then subsequently it was noticed that it would tend to orient itself towards the north or in a particular direction. Okay, now, so I first tried doing that by simply replacing the needle here with the lodestone, but that cork is too small for the lodestone to really sit properly on. It just happened to be a little bit bigger. I used this styrofoam. It's just a little bit larger. I didn't have a piece of cork. But what I noticed was when I tried to balance the lodestone on it, the torque, it created a sideways torque, okay? And presumably one of the problems here is I don't know the magnetic composition. Even if this has magnetic domains, it might not be a simple north to south running in any particular direction. In fact, it could have multiple north-south domains, okay? And in putting it on that, it might tend to tip. and if being that that is so small, it just falls off, and it won't. You can't use it as a water compass. Okay, so what I've just recently tried now is just getting a bigger piece of styrofoam. I figured, okay, well, eventually, it's not going to flip anything. I mean, I'll just try it, okay, because I can't lose by trying. So I try it, and it does not flip. Okay, and now the question is, will it eventually show a repeatable orientation? Okay, even if it has a complex magnetic structure, as long as it has a repeatable orientation to the Earth's field, well, that's a compass. Okay, I could label, in other words, if this disk. Now, when the disk approaches the side of a vessel, it's going to give an unreliable reading because number one, it's in contact with the side of the vessel, and number two, the water at the very edge is not flat because it's got that capillary shape to it, and that's going to make this interaction, much more complicated. So what you want to do is just push it out into the center. Okay, that's where you're going to have the flattest, and it's a bit of an inconvenience. I'm doing this under more or less an ideal condition in my living room, and but that's how we start off on something like this. Now, the idea is if I see this orient itself in a particular direction and it doesn't want to rotate anymore, first you have to be patient to see if it's not going to continue to rotate, for example. Then, if that orientation is an orientation such that it wants to always orient this way, I could label this side. I could glue it to the styrofoam and I could label this side north. And then on a subsequent day, when I'm at a different location, that should point north. Okay, now to test it, I can turn this, like, just say at 90 degrees, okay? Okay, just for starters, to see if it's going to reorient, okay? Let's see what it does. Okay, I could see I was getting a reaction out of it. It actually wanted to seem to move to the left, or to the right, actually. So I have to push it back. I'm only interested in the angle at which it finally ends up at. Okay, the other motions, however complicated they might be, I'm not interested in investigating that right now. I want to know if there is a residual of all the magnetic domains. Is there a residual domain, enough of a collective residual, if you combine everything, that it would want to have a repeatable orientation? Okay, and in this case, it's repeatable under what you might call an ideal condition. Very quiet, flat surface of water, in my living room. Okay, and you can see it's still rotating a bit, and I'm just going to tap it so that it moves a little bit more towards the center. So this, I could use pause. This will take a long time to go through all of these various steps, but I don't want to make it look like I'm cheating or anything. Okay, I started this off at 90 degrees to what this orientation more or less is going to be. And you can see that, well, now it's, looks like it's wanting to move towards the side here. That could happen for any number of reasons. There could even just be a small draft in the room, for example, even if it's difficult to see. And I see now, at the very end, it was almost sucked into that. And now look at the way it's, this, I can't exactly explain that. I'm assuming it's an interaction with this shape of the water surface. In other words, I think this wants to rotate, and it can't. It's tilting the styrofoam up at an angle, and I think when it gets anywhere near where the water is not perfectly flat, it gets some sort of a force. Okay, which is why I'm just going to continually push it back to the center and force it to orient itself in a flat space. Okay, and then will that be repeatable? It's not the simplest thing in the world here, obviously, and it's it's just very slow. Now it is rotating back. You can compare this with the earlier part of the video where we started off, and it was before I rotated at 90 degrees. it has come back to that same spot. So this would be the north, okay? And I could play with this some more and try to deduce more about what's happening on the different parts of the lodestone. I'm gonna try bringing them up in contact with my compass needle to try to see, if I could actually detect the multiple domains. But for this, I'm simply going to call this a win because it is possible to construct a water compass out of this in any case, okay? Even though it was something which seemed to have a complex domain. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take it off from that, okay? And I'll put the water compass aside for the moment, okay? And just in the last minute or so, now that I've demonstrated kind of a positive result, now I'm going to show you something that I actually ran into earlier. What I have here is a copper hook, okay? And I have it on a silk thread. This is another way to make a magnet, a compass, excuse me. That's not magnetic, not a water compass, but it's based on something that can rotate freely. But in this case, it's going to have some, it's not completely free because it's got the silk thread, which will have some torsion in it, okay? So, but nevertheless, if I put the needle in it, for example, okay, it wants to orient itself. Now, this doesn't have very much damping in it, so this is the sort of thing where it'll go back and forth, okay? And as it does, if you start off out of the orientation that you want to finally end up in, you'll get a torque that gets generated on the silk thread, and that will give you an error. You always want to reorient it so that the tension of the silk thread the torque on it is eliminated to get the final resting position, okay, for the best accuracy. This is not exactly a free pivot like you'd like, okay? But you can see here now the north pointing or north seeking, the north pole of that magnet, which is the eye end of the needle, is pointing towards the north side, okay? As expected. I did it as a water compass, and now it's doing it as a compass which is not on water, okay? Different type of a suspension. Now, interestingly enough, if I try doing that type of thing with the lodestone, and this is something I tried before, doing the, now we had kind of noticed that this side might point towards the north and this side, but it was a three-dimensional object, so we don't really know. Now, if I try loading this in on here in a way where I might expect the north-seeking side to start off pointing north, okay, let's see what happens. It's generating this torque, and it starts rotating in a counterclockwise direction, and it seems to have quite a bit of torque because it goes quite a bit before it wants to unwind, and this would take quite a while before it would settle down, and it's probably more problematic to use this than the larger styrofoam on the piece of water, and the reason of this partially is now it might settle out here, but it's settling it out in a position where that silk thread is now actually twisted up a couple of times. It's hard to even keep track of how many times it's twisted, and that's going to, produce an error in how it's going to finally end up. So it could work if you wait for it to settle out. You might find that it would want to go to that side, and it looks like it's kind of doing that right now. If you kind of look halfway between, but of course, it's possible that in this final settled position, that the silk thread might still have some torque on it. So, for example, if I remove it from that position, see, I started off in that position. If I move it in that position, and the copper unwinds more than once, like it is, that tells you there was a significant amount of winding that had taken place, and that could have been a false reading. So this is more problematic. I'm not saying it couldn't be used, okay? I think that the large water compass doesn't have that issue, and that shows that it is possible to make a compass out of a lodestone, even if we don't know which is the north end or south end, and the details of a complicated field here, okay? Okay, thanks. That's a long video, but very interesting.